what's really incredible right now is that we really are, living in extraordinary times. In America, we tend to look at the total population of our country, and this is true not only in our country but in other countries of the world. We tend to look at them in terms of generations because we've discovered that people that are older are different than people that are younger. They have certain characteristics, they have certain features, and we all have come to know that in the context of our life experience. And so in America, we have a generation from 1908 to 1925 or 1924. And we call that in America the greatest generation because that was the generation that, was born and basically were engaged in World War II. And these are the people that went to war. These are the people that, essentially gave their lives in order to be able to secure, our freedom. And so we look with pride upon this incredible organization. My dad was a member of the greatest generation. He was born in 1914. And he went to war in 1944. And so that was, a generation that is revered in our country as the people that really sacrificed, in many instances, their lives in order to be able to secure the freedom of their families in our country. Then there's another generation in America that we call the Builders. That was born between 1925 and 1946. There are about 65 million of them. There are a lot of builders. I'm a builder. I'm in that category. I'm kind of on the late side of the builders, but I still fall into that category. And they're builders. They're called builders because they're the ones that came in after their dads got back from the war, and they're the ones that built the infrastructure, for the country in which I live. They built businesses. They created opportunities for people to become engaged. They were really very, very actively involved in the things that basically have built the infrastructure of the country in which I live. Then that's followed by the boomers, the baby boomers. And even if you're not an American, you probably have heard that term because this was the generation of people that were born between 1946, after the war was over, to 1964. There are 75 million of them. So in the combination of the builders and the boomers, there are about 120 or 125 million people. And the boomers, built on the foundations of their dads. They came in and they made business successful. They built the economy of America to be one of the, the greatest and the most prosperous of countries in the world. And these people, have done so much to build the character of our country. And they have also been exceptionally generous. So it's really important to know this, in the world of philanthropy, because this generation, these two generations, the builders and the boomer, 120 boomers, the 125 million of them, are responsible for giving or getting. In other words, they either give or they direct 80% of all the philanthropy in the United States of America. Now, to put that in monetary terms, there was $400 billion given in the year 2014. $400 billion was given. 80% of that, $320 billion, was either given or driven by baby boomers and builders. They're the most generous generation in American history. They've done so very, very much in order to be able to help organizations all over the world. It's likely that virtually every country in the world has benefited from the generosity of the builders and the boomers who have made sure that opportunity was made possible for people in countries all over the world. And I suspect that many of the organizations, that many of the people represented here at the European Leadership Forum have been the beneficiaries of the generosity of these great generations. Now, they're followed by three other generations. The next generation is what's called the X generation. And the X generation is those born between 1964 and 1980. There's only about 45 million of them. And they give about 10 to 12% of all the money being given in America today. It's a smaller generation than the builders and the boomers. But they are engaged in philanthropy. They give generously, and their size of their gifts are are somewhat similar to their fathers. The early, as is in the case of all the generations, the early part of the generation looks more like their fathers. The latter part of the generation looks more like the generation that follows them. And I suspect that you can relate to that. I'm more like a boomer than I am a builder, because I was right at the tail end of the builders. And so that would be true with all the generations. But the builders, are not going to change substantially in terms of their giving patterns. They're well established in their careers. The youngest of them are probably in their late 40s, and the oldest of them are moving up into their late 50s and early 60s. And so they're relatively established in terms of their practices. Now, the two following generations are the generations that basically are generations that you need to be concerned about, because these are the generations that are going to shape the future of your world in the years to come. We call the Y generation, those born between 1980 and 2000, we call those the millennials. They were born, and during that period of time that led up to the change of the century, to the 21st century. They're getting older now. I mean, you can do the math in terms of how old they might be given the fact of the years that they were born. But they have, children. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of the millennials, because they have some very commendable characteristics. And they really are people that really want to get engaged. They want to be involved. And interestingly enough, per capita, there are more millennials that give, and that millennial categorization would go from not only the Y generation, but to the Z generation up to 2015. Per capita, there are more millennials that give than builders and boomers in terms of numbers. They are involved in philanthropy, and that's really very, very important to remember. Between the Y and the Zs, there are about 110 or 120 million. So it makes them a very, very large segment of our country. There are 309 million people in America. 120 million of them are millennials. So they are going to be shaping the future of our country, and they're going to be shaping, in many instances, the future of philanthropy in the world, because still America is one of the most generous countries in support of philanthropy in the world. Now let's go back and talk about the builders and boomers a little bit, and some of the characteristics of the builders and boomers. The builders and boomers, as we've said, are extremely generous, and they have been very, very generous. They're beginning to die. The realities are that I'm a young builder at 70, so the older builders, are beginning to die, and they're dying at the rate of about 1,500 a day. As far as the boomers are concerned, they're retiring at the rate of 10,000 a day. And that's expected to be a trend that's going to continue for the next 8 to 10 years. And so they're retiring. So as they retire, they have less money. And as they die, they have no money, okay? Because you don't take your money with you. You can, but it's probably going to end up some in no one's hands. But the realities are that generation is beginning to dissipate. And because of that, it's anticipated, and this is the really scary thing in the world of philanthropy right now, and everybody that lives in that world is totally aware of what's happening. Because as the builders and the boomers die, the money that they've been giving is no longer going to be available, and it's not going to be picked up in the same levels by the subsequent generations. In fact, it's anticipated that there could be as much in the next 8 years as 60% of what it is that they gave that's not going to be picked up by the X-gens, the Ys, or the Zs. In other words, 60. Now remember, they gave $320 billion in 2014. If you were to lose 60% of $320 billion, we're into almost $200 billion that won't be available, to charities and nonprofits around the world. And that's a cause of really deep concern. It was just talked about a few years ago, and then all of a sudden it became, clearly known of the dimensions of what that would mean to the NGO world. I was just in Belgrade in Serbia a month or so ago. And one of the places that I spoke was the Belgrade Chamber of Commerce. Now, that was the first national or city Chamber of Commerce meeting that I'd ever spoken at, so I was somewhat concerned, or I really didn't know why they were inviting me to come to that kind of a meeting. But the Chamber of Commerce leadership had invited all the NGOs to come to this meeting, and the members of the business community that represent the Chamber of Commerce, they were there as well. And one of the persons that came to talk to me, because he was introducing himself to me, and he says, we're a business, and he told me about his business, and he says, we're so glad that you're here. And I said, but why did you ask me here? And he said, we've discovered that everything that is good that is happening in Belgrade, is being done by NGOs. I mean, everything from trafficking. We have several NGOs that are working to try to prevent trafficking from occurring and growing in our city. Homelessness, we've got all kinds of people that are dealing with homelessness. We've got this happening and this happening and this happening. And he told me all the things that the NGOs were doing. And he said, if we were to lose these NGOs, it would be catastrophic. Because the realities are, we know that the municipality does not have the capacity of being able to fulfill the gap that would be left by losing them. And so we have you here because we want to know as business people what it is we need to do to support the NGOs. And we want you to help the NGOs and learn how to do better what it is that they do so that we don't lose them. But we've realized that this, for many years, has been, kind of a neutral zone. We have discovered that now we have to embrace one another and work together to make sure that the things that basically NGOs are doing and nonprofits are doing can continue so that we can reach some of the crises that we face in our city, as he was speaking on behalf of his city of Belgrade. So it would be catastrophic, obviously, to lose, some of the resources that basically NGOs depend upon in order to be able to do what it is they do. And so that's one of the reasons why everybody's very concerned about this demographic change. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Y and the Z gens. They're really interesting. As we've already pointed out, they are generous, and they really do want to get involved. They're extremely well educated. They're incredible parents, as opposed to their fathers that really weren't. They were kind of absentee dads. They were working, and I would fall into that category. I was working hard, to make sure that I was supplying for the needs of my family. I had a goal to build a profession, and I worked hard to do that, and working 16 hours days and getting up early in the morning and coming back late at night and traveling a lot in order to be able to establish myself. And that's kind of what I learned from my dad. My dad was a hard worker, and I just said, I want to be as hard a worker as my dad. And my kids are saying, well, Dad, you were never home. You were never home. I mean, you missed this and missed that and missed that. And I said, well, I provided for you really well. Well, you provided for us really well, Dad, but, and they're essentially saying, I'm not going to do that. And so in America, we call the millennials, the helicopter parents. I mean, they're the kind of hovering over their children and being involved in every decision. And one of the things that happened when I was, in the peak of my career, if somebody had come to me and would have said, Jerry, if you work 10 more hours a week, we'll give you $20,000 more a year, I wouldn't have even thought about that. Well, of course I'll do that. But if you say the same thing to a millennial, all of them almost would say, no thanks. You see, they make as much money as they need in order to do what it is they want to do. And they stay on the job on the average of 18 to 24 months, and then they move from job to job to job. Because if it's inconvenient and it keeps them from doing what it is they want, then the realities are they're not going to do it. I wrote a book not too long ago. It was entitled, You Snooze, You Lose. And the whole purpose of the title was that if you go to sleep tonight thinking you're going to wake up tomorrow morning and everything's going to be all better, then you're going to lose some of the greatest opportunities that have ever been afforded a generation. And so one of the statements that I made in the book was this, and it was a book that was reviewed, and it's interesting that they pick one sentence out of the book and say, this sentence said it all. I said, well, gee, I could have saved a lot of time and energy if I just said the sentence and didn't write the book. But the sentence was, it would be more likely for a millennial to make an impulsive decision to go to Uganda for a year than to put $10 in an offering plate. And the guy that reviewed it said, Jerry said it all in one sentence. But I think it does reflect a little bit of the character of the millennials. They want to get engaged. And they want to get their hands dirty. They see their parents as hypocrites, because Dad's way of dealing with things was to basically write a check and say, go do something about it. And then their situation is, well, I don't want to, I'll take the check, but I'm going to go do something about it too, because you never did that. And so they are extremely engaged. They give, and they give to multiple sources. And that's really very, very important to remember. Because when I grew up, I grew up in the state of Maine, and when I was a kid, within 35 miles of where I lived, everybody in my life that was important lived in that 35-mile cycle and that circle. My grandparents lived there, my parents lived there, my aunts and uncles lived there, all my cousins lived there. I mean, we were within 25 minutes of anybody, and we'd have all kinds of family get-togethers and so forth. But now the people of our country, and I suspect it's true to some degree in your countries as well, but now people are scattered over everywhere. I have a sister in Chicago. I have another one in Hartford, Connecticut. I've got nephews in Maine. I've got others in California. I mean, the realities are they're all over. I've got a son that lives in Phoenix, another one that lives 110 miles away, and our families are kind of dissipated, and that's the way it is. But and the millennials, the other thing that millennials have is they all have passports. I mean, I never even heard of a passport until I was like 30 or something. I mean, the realities are we never went anywhere, but these people have been all over. These generations have been everywhere. And they've seen things. And the things that they've seen have impacted their lives, and they're things that they donate to. But because, and the thing that was true of me, and it was true of my parents as well, is we supported in our life, maybe 4 organizations generously. We supported our church. We had another couple of organizations that we've supported. Sue and I have supported the IFES movement, and we've done a whole lot of other things. But basically, we've concentrated our giving on about 4 things. The millennial focuses on about 30 things. They make less money, so what's that mean in terms of the size of the gift? The size of the gift is going to be less. So there's 3 things that we can learn about what's happening in the period of time that we're talking about now. First of all, as it relates to the builders and the boomers, there are things to remember. First of all, in America, there's about $40 trillion that's going to pass from one generation to another as the boomers and the builders die. And so that money is going to go somewhere, and it will probably go to their children. Some of it will go to charity. And so if you're working with donors in our country that are older, you might want to suggest to them the opportunity of a legacy gift or something of that nature, because that's something that they would be somewhat interested in, because they realize that they're no longer going to be here, but they want some of the things that they were very committed to be able to survive and to continue and to flourish. And so that's really important to remember. The other thing, as it relates to the millennials, that really is important for us to remember is because they give less money, or they have less money, they're going to give less money. And so I think one of the factors that is going to happen, this is a prediction that I really am going to stand by, and that is that one of the factors that is going to determine philanthropy in the 21st century, among other things, is going to be micro-giving. In other words, that's never been talked about. We've lived our lives around the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule basically states that 80% of the money that's being given in America today, or in your world today, it really makes no difference where we're coming from, that 80% of the money comes from 20% of the people. And that's the reason why that's true is because 80% of the wealth is held by 20% of the people in the world. And Frederick Pareto knew that in Italy when the 80-20 rule really came into fruition. But I think, to some degree, that's going to change as we move into the future. And I think we're going to always have 80-20 to some degree. There's always going to be people that have more wealth than other people. But I think what we really need to mobilize, because what we have done in philanthropy is we have essentially spent all of our time focusing on the 20% at the expense of the 80%. And so we have communicated to the 80% that they're of little value. You have little to offer to us, so we're not going to bother you. And now we're trying to build them up as potential donors to come alongside our support. So there's a number of organizations that we're involved in right now, but one of the organizations that we're involved in basically is encouraging people, because if you look at your database, we're going to take just a teeny bit longer, but if you look at a database, every database of an organization, you have donors, right? And then the majority of your database are either inactive, lapsed, or non-donors. And that would be true with most of the organizations with whom we work. If you want to know a little bit about your organization, just look at the total database and begin to analyze it in terms of the sizes of gifts and then the inactivity of other people on your database. And you'll discover that a majority, by and large, are people that are inactive or not consistent in terms of their giving. And that's where you need to focus your attention. And so we have organizations, and here's an organization that I support. It's an organization that has been a client of mine, and I'm going to do one thing, and then we'll conclude this. And that client is Habitat for Humanity, and you may know that organization. They have 11 million people on their database. That's a pretty big database. 2 million donors. 9 million non-donors or inactive donors. Stop and think about that now. So they have 9 million people on their database that they're sending mail to, that they're encouraging to become involved, they're sending newsletters and so forth, but they're not participating financially. So we're suggesting to them that why don't you have a campaign to ask some of these people to give 5 cents a day to support Habitat for Humanity. 5 cents a day? That's $1.52 a week. That's $18.25 a year. And oh, by the way, you're all on social media. You know, the average person in our country spends 6 hours a day on social media. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, all these. They're spending 6 hours a day. I have 1,000 people that follow me. I can't even understand. I don't even know I had 1,000 friends. Now I know I have at least 1,000 people that know my name. And so why don't you, Jerry, let's just take an example. Jerry, you know about Habitat for Humanity. I'm probably one of those names that doesn't give money. You know, would you give 5 cents a day? Yes, that's $1.52. I understand that. I'll do it. Happy to do it. And so I give my 5 cents a day. And, well, by the way, Jerry, you have lots of friends. Why don't you ask your friends to go and do the same thing? Well, of 1,000 people, I suspect I could get 5 or 10 of them that would say, yeah, I'll do that with Jerry, because that is a worthy organization that's doing a lot of good work. So let's just say that, and this is ridiculous, I understand, but this is really kind of fun to do. I like to do ridiculous things. Let's say that 4.5 million of the 9 million, so that's half of the people that aren't supporting, that they all choose to give 5 cents a day. Right? And let's say that each of them, you know, we won't say 5 people, but each of them go to their social networks and they say, will you join me? And let's say that each of them get 3 people to do it. So now we've got, let's see here, I got to go back to my calculator here. We can cut this out. That's one of the benefits of, okay, so, and we're going to add 3 people, so we're going to times 3. Okay. And each of them give 5 cents a day, which is $18.25 a year. That would generate for that organization in new income $246,375,000. But imagine how healthy the organization would be. If you had an organization, you know, that was raising $5 million a year and they had 5 donors, you say, well, that's great that they have, you know, $1 million donors. But if one of those donors die, you're in a world of hurt, right? But if, on the other side, you had an organization that was only raising $500,000 a year, but they had 2,500 donors, which is the most developmentally healthy? And you'd have to conclude is the other one, because they have a stronger base of support, and they have more people engaged, and everything is better because of that. So think about all of those things as you're thinking about philanthropy in the 21st century. Okay, you can take the 3 minutes, 50 seconds that I didn't give you on the last slide and add it to this one, and everybody will be happy. So, isn't that intriguing? Don't you find all of that intriguing? I find it very, very fascinating. Yeah. And there's a university that's not too far from my town. It's called Indiana Wesleyan University. They're the largest extension university Christian university in the country. We have, University of Phoenix, which is all over the United States, and a couple of others that have, a presence in America. But this is one of the largest. They have 5% of their alumni that donate. Now, that's almost hard to imagine. 5%, and they probably have, 30 or 40,000, alumni, I would suspect, and maybe even more. And 95% of them don't give. And it's not because I think they're indifferent or they don't care. I think we have concluded that if you don't have a lot to give, you're not worth too much to us. And so we just kind of ignore them. And we have done that consistently for years in our country. And now all of a sudden, these are becoming extremely important people because we need them. And it's of great value for this, to occur. So I would really encourage you to, we've got all kinds of information on micro-giving opportunities. And it's something that you can do independently. You don't need, there are organizations that can help you, but the reality is any of you could ask for 5 cents and $18.25 a year and process that gift yourself. You don't need somebody else to help you to do that. There's more than just getting the money, however, and that's really important. Because, development implies that we're doing something to develop these relationships. And how do you develop an $18 a year donor? You've got to figure that out, or else they're not going to repeat their giving. Now, in many instances, what they'll do, and which is the case because in our country they use credit cards to make those decisions, and so they just make a credit card commitment, and basically it's renewed every year. So when the year of their anniversary comes, they're billed another $18.25 for the next year. So there is some level of consistency, unless of course your card expires and you don't renew it. So there are things that we are doing basically to help organizations understand how do you take this group of donors, this new group of donors that we've never had before, and how do we develop them in the kinds of meaningful ways, just the way we did their fathers, but at another level, so that they will continue to be lifelong supporters of our organization. So I think the average millennial today supports about 20 or 30 organizations. Isn't that interesting? And they give, relatively small gifts. And so we're really, that's a very significant part of our practice right now in our consulting firm, is trying to help organizations to leverage the power of social media by engaging millennials in support of the organizations they represent.